So this is it. We're here. We're finally in this first of two syzygies. First will be a new moon in Leo and then a full moon in Aquarius. And what's special about these two is that they happen with a very dynamic grand cross or T-square in fixed signs. And so it's sort of a climax of intensity of this summer, Thursday this week, new moon in Leo. Here we are, and it's always good to map the syzygies, map the new moons and full moons. This is an ancient technique for how to understand the unfoldment of the astrological energies. It goes all the way back to Ptolemy. In his text, he talks about watching those new moons and full moons. And so we're here in 2022, late July, early August. It's a period that's been on my radar because it's Mars-Saturn square. Every year, there's only a couple of pockets where you have hard aspects between Mars and Saturn. Mars and Saturn are the two malefic planets, Saturn being restriction, isolation, coldness, amongst many other things. Mars being kind of shaking, can be violence, can be just shocks to the system. When those two things square and oppose, they really are like the red alert circling that you would have on any ephemerides when you're planning the year ahead. So in 2022, this happens only two times. We had 6 March 2022 to 15 April 2022. And then 5 July 2022 to 20 August 2022. And I think that this 5 July ingress of Mars into Taurus is a great example of why sign-based aspects are so important, because there was a major shift when Mars came into Taurus. By sign, it was now squaring Saturn, even though Saturn was 20 degrees away or more. Mars came in and they share those fixed signs, and we now have the square between Mars and Saturn. Right after that, things went haywire. Sri Lanka had massive protests. They took the government down. This was like a quintessential Mars and Taurus moment when you had protesters chilling in the palace of the president. But this was part of the Mars-Saturn square story, and we're still in that. The protests in Sri Lanka have continued, and they're ongoing. Protests in Panama have emerged, even though that orb, now Mars is coming closer and closer to Saturn, that square will perfect on 7 August. But we've had a somewhat wide orb, but the sign-based square has been operative and intact, and you see the intensities. So it's just been a good example. I always look at the sign-based aspects because in my experience, they time things even when the orb is quite wide. And we can come back to Vettius Valens. This is maybe the most important paragraph, in my view, in the Hellenistic tradition, because it's the summary of each of the planets and what they do. And here he says that we're just going to look at Mars and Saturn. Mars becomes the ruler of action and effort, and Saturn is the ruler of ignorance and necessity. So action out of necessity, right? And those two things squaring off. That's what happens with protesters. They had to protest. Didn't have food, couldn't afford food or fuel. What else are you going to do? And so it's the perfect sort of expression of a Mars-Saturn square. And just a little bit more context. So this new moon in Leo kicks off on 28 July, happens on 28 July, perfects on 28 July. And after the new moon, you have this very dynamic and anticipated triple conjunction with Mars, the North Node, and Uranus. I've done a whole video on that you can find here, but that's 31 July, 1st August, and 2nd August, right there compressed within 48 hours. And it's another example of this fixed activation that we've entered into with these syzygies fusing, capturing the energies as they hit like a drum beat. And then that Mars-Saturn square perfects 7 August 2156 here in Central Europe. So it's kind of a buckle up time. We're not out of the woods yet. And by sign, the Mars-Saturn square does not finish until 20 August. Just stay settled, locked in, and navigating these energies because they're very, very dynamic. Now, the next thing I want to look at, Dr. Richard Tarnas, who, this is maybe my favorite paragraph in the recent canon, maybe the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, because it encapsulates a very foundational principle of aspect theory that goes all the way back in the tradition. But when writing about aspects, Dr. Tarnas says the forming of a major aspect between the two planets is seen as coinciding with significant mutual activation of the two corresponding archetypes. And then he says here, it is especially the hard aspect quadrature alignments in any given cycle, conjunction, opposition, squares. So again, that's what hard aspects are, conjunctions, oppositions, or squares. It's like a cross, the crux. You shake the crux when you have a hard aspect. So these aspects, Dr. Tarnas says, coincide with highly dynamic archetypal tendencies and decisive concrete events that reflect that dynamism. This is when things go down, when you have the hard aspects. It's when the maneuvers take place, the unfoldment and the kind of moving into action happens. As opposed to, he says, the soft aspects, trines and sextiles, are regarded as harmonious, generally less challenging, but less dynamically evident and less likely to be correlated, he goes on, to big events. This is why hard aspects are what we zone in on, because it's when things emerge, when things happen. You can just look at history. I'm telling you, I've done this over and over again. You just see charts, any kind of dynamic event, pull it up. Usually there's like moon with Saturn. The moon, as the great trigger of the sky, the moon will be in hard aspect with the malefics for most big events, okay? That's a whole separate video. Maybe one day I'll make a video and just go through all of them and say hard aspects, dynamic change, this is how it's evident, and just run through a bunch of them. And now the one other component, if we come back to Dr. Hand and horoscope symbols, remember he talks about fixed signs being things that have the function of preserving and sustaining. And these are things that are predictable and reliable. And so when you combine this idea of the hard aspects and the fixed signs, it's like the settlement, the reliability is under pressure for this dynamic shift. And that's what's so maybe challenging about fixed sign, malefic hard aspect, is that what's in target is that which we might have experienced as settled for a long time. And then boom, it has to shift and change. I mean, think about food prices and fuel prices, just to go back to the Sri Lanka and the Panama example. And that's all over the world right now. Those are just the two that have been maybe most in the news for protests. You think day to day, fuel prices, oh, it maybe goes up and down a little bit, but you can get the food you need. The wheat prices, you can buy that bread at the shop or buy the flour. Those basically should remain somewhat stable in the system. And so when it comes to a shift out of what should be stable, it really does make for some explosive turns of events, these dynamic unfoldments. Let's just settle in here then. Look at the chart of the new moon in Leo. Here you go. 5 degrees Leo in the 6th degree of Leo. You can see the orb of the opposition to Saturn is quite wide. You're looking at about an 18-degree orb. The orb with the square to Mars, a 10-degree orb. So that one's somewhat wide, but still quite in play for an activation of the Mars-Saturn square, which is now set up in the signs where it will later perfect. I think about these as like a strobe light. You're in a club, you can't see anything. A strobe light goes off, you see people for a second. That's what the syzygies are. They light up the moment. They capture a kind of snapshot of the energy. And then the next light, the next full moon in Aquarius will be another snapshot, and you can see the shifts and the changes. But there it is, the dynamic hard aspect by sign right here in the chart. Now what else is here? You've got Mercury at 18 degrees, 22 degree minutes in its own Egyptian term. Mercury has nice strength here. It's co-present with the luminaries and blending here. You may want to be ready to communicate, ready to share your vision, ready to share your mentality. Remember Leo, the archetype, what is it? It's the selfhood that we formulate and that we carry through the day. So we're all carrying a certain identity, and that's what is a big part of the energy here, is maintaining and sort of leading with and talking about who we are and what we want to be, even doing planning or projective visioning in terms of who you are. What are you? What do you want to be? What's your life going to be? That's one node of this very dynamic activation, with Mercury there, writing, thinking, journaling, planning, discussions, analysis. All of those things can be supported now. Jupiter in Aries, closely trining this syzygy, and that's a kind of a hidden power here. Jupiter is stationing retrograde, which punctuates the Jupiter energy. You might think about your story. Jupiter came into Aries mid-May 2022. Now it's kind of a time to reflect. We're here 25 July. That's June. It's about 2 months, 2.5 months. What changed in your life? This syzygy is a nice one to bring in, maybe this Mercury-Jupiter trine. Note what happened in your life since mid-May, what you then want to rework about what happened, because Jupiter will re-enter in the winter solstice 2022, comes back into Aries, and then blows through these degrees quite fast until May 2023. So this is a good, I think, moment using this Mercury-Jupiter trine with the luminaries to reflect on your identity, your selfhood, what you want, your dreams and hopes, your visions for early 2023. And this is actually might help us with some of the dynamic events that are going to unfold as a result of the Saturn-Mars a T-square with the luminaries in this moment, you can kind of rely on maybe some of the lessons or growth or change that's emerged in your life since about mid-May. You know, like when things change, sometimes it's good, like, no, I grew. No, I'm strong now. I know how to set that boundary, or I know how to say no, or I know how to ask for what I want, or this is now what I want and it's in my life. I can use that. I can, you know, those new pillows in my bedroom can help me sleep better. That's sort of a strange example, but this is just one thing of how, what benefits have come in with Jupiter. How can they be utilized in a dynamic moment like this syzygy? And so those are the major configurations I want to discuss here. I mean, the other thing to just point out is that you have Mars with Uranus in the North Node. That energy, the window is open strongly for the North Node Uranus energy. And if we just come back to Dr. Tarnas, I quoted this in my last video. Remember, he says Uranus is rebellion, change, freedom, liberation, reform, revolution, unexpected breakup of structures with sudden surprises. So just in this moment, I would encourage you to be prepared for the unexpected. Whether you're out in life and just headlong into adventure, be prepared for the unexpected. Whether you've kind of hunkered down a little bit or you're just in more of a protective mode, look for the unexpected, because the Uranian component here is in play with this syzygy, Uranus square by sign as well. More than anything though, it's mixing with Mars very close now, and it's squaring Saturn very close. And so this Uranian blend is certainly part of the makeup of this moment. It's very dynamic. There could be surprising events that shift and change and dynamic unfoldment of all kinds. You know, I'm kind of chilled out. I'm kind of just working, hunkering down a little bit. Doesn't mean anybody else has to, but you know, if you're doing that, be prepared for unexpected turns and take care out there. Have a wonderful week.